Why is she even still alive? That was the sentence. Not whispered. Not argued over. Not said in anger. Said plainly. Like a delay someone was tired of waiting through. I stopped walking. Not because my legs failed me, because my mind needed a second to catch up with my ears. My name is Mabel Hemsworth. I am 72 years old. I live in Ohio. I have 3 children. And my husband Arthur has been dead for 9 years. I was standing just outside the dining room when I heard it. My purse was still on my shoulder. Inside it, a folded sweater I'd brought because my hands shake when I get cold now. Even in rooms that aren't cold. Someone laughed after the sentence. Not loud, not embarrassed, just sharp enough to seal it. They didn't know I was there. That's how I knew it was honest. I could have turned around. I could have left quietly and pretended the world hadn't just split open in a very specific way. That's what women my age are good at. Leaving without being noticed. Carrying pain without making it inconvenient. Instead, I walked in. The conversation stopped, the way it does when people realize too late that something private has escaped into the open. "Oh, Mom," my son said. "Too fast, too cheerful, the kind of voice you use when you're trying to smooth something that already broke." I smiled. I didn't plan to. It was the smile you learn after years of swallowing moments that don't belong to you anymore. The polite one. The non-threatening one. I sat where there was room. Not where I used to sit. Not at the head of the table. Not even near it. At the side. They resumed talking after a moment. About plans. About timing. About what comes next. No one said my name again. No one asked if I was tired. No one asked if I wanted to leave. I passed the bread when asked. I nodded when spoken to. Inside, something was shaking loose. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. When Arthur was alive, people lowered their voices around me. They waited for me to speak. They checked my face before finishing sentences. After he died, they stopped. Widowhood didn't make me invisible overnight. It was slower than that. Quieter. Like someone gradually turning the volume down on your presence. That night, sitting at that table, I realized something painful and precise. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were waiting for me to stop taking up space. I stayed until the end. I always do. I helped stack plates. I folded napkins. I wiped a spill someone else ignored. When I stood to leave, no one stood with me. Not out of cruelty, out of habit. I walked out alone. The air outside felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe I did. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting in my lap, breathing slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just sat. Because somewhere between that sentence and the silence that followed, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just sorrow. This wasn't just age. This was the beginning of a decision. A quiet one. A patient one. A decision that would change what they thought they were entitled to. And they had no idea what I was about to take back. That night, I understood why people like me disappear. Not because we're pushed out, because we're trained to doubt ourselves. That night, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the doorway and let the house stay dim, the way it likes to be when no one is performing inside it. The clock in the hallway was ticking too loudly. It always does. I've lived with that sound for years, but suddenly it felt like it was counting something down instead of forward. I set my purse on the chair and rested my hand on it for a moment longer than necessary, as if letting go too quickly might make the evening rush back into me. Then my hands started shaking. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that looks like age from the outside. The kind you hide by clasping your fingers together and pretending you're just tired. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. Half of it spilled on the counter. I stared at the spill. Didn't wipe it immediately. Just watched it spread slowly, soaking into a place that had been clean seconds before. That felt familiar. I finally sat at the kitchen table and rested my forehead in my hands. For a long time, I just breathed. I wasn't crying yet. That came later. What came first was something worse. Doubt. Not doubt about them. Doubt about myself. I replayed the evening in my head, frame by frame, like a film that wouldn't stop. Maybe I misheard. Maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe I've become too sensitive. Those are dangerous thoughts at this age, because the world is always ready to agree with them. I started thinking back over the past few years. The invitations that came later than everyone else's. The conversations that ended when I entered the room. The decisions that were already made by the time I was informed. I'd explained all of it away. They're busy, they mean well. This is just how families change. But sitting alone at that table, with the house humming quietly around me, I understood something I hadn't wanted to face. They hadn't forgotten me. They had reclassified me. From person to obligation. From presence to waiting room. I stood up and opened the fridge, closed it again. Food felt unnecessary, like something meant for people whose lives were still being scheduled. Instead, I walked down the hallway and opened the closet. I rarely touched anymore. Behind winter coats and an old vacuum was the filing cabinet. I hadn't planned to open it. My hand just reached for the handle. Inside were folders I'd labeled years ago and never expected to need. House papers, old bank statements, copies of things I'd signed without thinking twice. I pulled one folder out and set it on the table. Then another. Receipts, signatures, dates, proof of effort that had never asked for recognition. I remembered saying, "Don't worry about it." I remembered meaning it. I remembered believing that love kept its own records. I was wrong. Love forgets. Paper doesn't. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me alert. I sat back in my chair and looked around the kitchen. This room had fed birthdays, comforted fevers, held whispered conversations after bad days. It had listened to me say, "It's okay," when it wasn't. And suddenly, I understood something with painful clarity. The people who laughed earlier weren't waiting for me to be gone. They were waiting for me to stop noticing. That's when something shifted. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Not because the pain disappeared, but because it changed direction. I didn't touch the papers again that night. I didn't make any calls. I didn't confront anyone. I put everything back exactly where it was. Carefully. Because whatever came next would need patience. And patience, I still had plenty of. I washed the spilled water off the counter, dried my hands, turned off the kitchen light. Before going to bed, I stood in the hallway and listened to the clock again. It sounded different now. Not like a countdown, like a reminder. Time hadn't taken everything from me. Not yet. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know yet, was that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. The first time they treated me like furniture, they didn't raise their voices. They didn't argue. They didn't explain. They just walked in and started rearranging my life as if I wasn't sitting there. The next time I saw them, it wasn't a confrontation. It was worse. It was ordinary. They came over on a Sunday afternoon, not announced, not invited by me. My son called from the driveway. "We're outside," he said. "Not can we come in? Just we're here." I opened the door anyway. That's what I was still good at back then. They walked in carrying bags, talking over each other, already mid-conversation. Something about a payment. Something about timing. I stepped aside to let them pass. No one thanked me. My daughter-in-law went straight to the kitchen and set the bags down like the house already belonged to her. She opened a cabinet, paused, then turned to my son. "Didn't she used to keep the glasses here?" She. Not Mom. Not Mabel. She. I stood there holding my cardigan closed at the chest, listening to them discuss my kitchen like it was a storage unit they've forgotten how to organize. "It doesn't matter," my son said. "We're not staying long." Not staying long. Like I was a waiting room. They sat at the table without asking. My son pulled papers from his bag. Utility bills. Bank printouts. I recognized the paper immediately. My name was still on half of it. "We just wanted to go over a few things," he said, clearing his throat. Casual. Too casual. My daughter-in-law smiled at me. That polite smile people use when they're about to take something and don't want you to notice. "You don't mind, right?" she said. As if the answer had already been decided. I didn't answer right away. That made them uncomfortable. My son tapped the papers into alignment. He hated silence. Always had. "So," he continued, "things are a little tight right now." Tight, that word again? They talked about expenses, rising costs, unexpected delays. They didn't ask if I understood. They assumed I would. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "We figured it just makes sense for you to keep helping for now." Keep helping. Not, could you, not, would you consider? Just keep. I looked at the papers, at the totals, at the highlighted lines, at the way my daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, watching my reaction like this was a test she'd already graded. "You're not really using the money for anything else," she added lightly. "I mean, you're home most days." There it was, not loud, not cruel, just efficient disrespect. I felt my face heat, not from anger, from realization. They weren't asking anymore. They were managing me. My son noticed my silence. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. As if dignity was an inconvenience. I asked one question. Just one. "And what happens when I say no?" The room shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly. My daughter-in-law's smile froze. My son swallowed. "No reason to talk like that," he said quickly. "We're family." Family. That word only appeared when money was involved. No one answered my question. That was my answer. They stayed another 15 minutes. Talking. Explaining. Justifying. I barely spoke. When they finally stood to leave, my daughter-in-law paused at the door. "You should really think about downsizing," she said. "This place is a lot for you. A lot for you. Not, are you okay here? Not, do you still enjoy it? A lot." Like my life had become clutter. They drove away without looking back. I locked the door, then leaned against it. My hands shook, not from weakness, from rage I hadn't learned how to express yet. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the same table where they'd laid out my worth in columns. That's when I understood the truth. They hadn't meant to reveal. They weren't cruel. They were comfortable. Comfortable spending my money. Comfortable rearranging my space. Comfortable speaking around me instead of to me. Because they believed I would never change the arrangement. And for the first time since my husband died, I realized something terrifying and powerful at the same time. They needed me more than they respected me. And once you see that clearly, once you feel it settle in your chest, you stop asking how to keep the peace. You start asking a different question entirely. What happens when I stop being useful? That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, from planning. And somewhere across town, without knowing it yet, my son and his wife were about to learn that dependence makes people polite, but independence makes them silent. They didn't get kinder after that day. They got careful. And when people suddenly become careful around you, it's not because they care. It's because they're afraid of losing something. After that Sunday, something changed. Not in how they treated me, in how carefully they treated me. The calls became shorter. The visits became quieter. The politeness became strained, like people walking across thin ice while pretending it's solid ground. My son started calling more often, but only in the mornings. Before work. Before he needed to sound patient. "How are you feeling today?" he'd ask. Not, "How are you?" "How are you feeling?" As if my emotions were symptoms that needed managing. I noticed my daughter-in-law stopped calling altogether. Instead, she texted. Short messages, neutral tone. Always ending with a question that wasn't really a question. "Everything okay on your end?" "Just checking before we move forward. Let us know if there's any issue." Issue. Like I was a system that might malfunction. One afternoon, they came by again. This time, they knocked. That alone told me something. I opened the door slowly. They stood too close together, like people presenting a united front. My daughter-in-law smiled first. "We didn't want to surprise you," she said. I stepped aside. They walked in but didn't sit down right away. That hesitation, that uncertainty, that was new. My son cleared his throat. "So, we've been talking. Talking. Not with me. About me. We might need to make a few adjustments," he continued. Adjustments. Another soft word. My daughter-in-law folded her arms. She didn't look at me. She looked at the room, the furniture, the walls, the photos. "You don't really need all this space," she said casually. "I mean, it's just you. Just you." That phrase landed heavier than anything else. I said nothing. That made her uncomfortable. She shifted her weight. "We're not saying you should leave," she added quickly. "Just think about what makes sense." Makes sense. Sense. For whom? My son stepped in, voice tighter now. "We're just trying to plan responsibly." Responsibly. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't offer them anything. That silence stretched. My daughter-in-law finally snapped. Just a little. "You don't have to make everything so tense," she said. There it was. The irritation. The resentment. Held back like breath under water. I turned to face her. "I'm not," I said calmly. "I'm listening." She opened her mouth. Closed it. My son watched her carefully. He knew. They both knew. They needed something, and anger would risk it. "So," he said carefully. We just want to be on the same page. Same page. I nodded once. I agree. Relief flickered across his face. Then I added, I'd like some time to think. The room changed. My daughter-in-law's jaw tightened. My son's smile faltered. How much time? He asked. I shrugged. As much as I need. That wasn't the answer they wanted. But some things are time-sensitive, my daughter-in-law said sharply, then stopped herself. Too sharp. She inhaled slowly, softened her voice. We just don't want to be caught off guard. Caught. Off guard. That's what this was really about. Not concern. Not care. Control. They stayed another few minutes. Said nothing important. Then left. When the door closed behind them, I stood still for a long time. I could feel it now. Their anger. Their confusion. Their restraint. They wanted to pressure me. To rush me. To guilt me. But they couldn't. Because pressure works best when the person believes they're powerless. And for the first time, I wasn't playing along. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. Let us know soon. We need clarity. Clarity. I smiled. Not because I was amused. Because I finally understood. They weren't angry because I'd said no. They were angry because I hadn't said yes fast enough. And that night, as I turned off the lights and sat in the quiet of my living room, I realized something important. They were waiting. Waiting for reassurance. Waiting for compliance. Waiting for the version of me that smoothed everything over. And for the first time in years, I let them wait. Because nothing unsettles people more than a woman they thought they understood becoming unreadable, I didn't rush. The first thing I changed wasn't obvious. That's important. People expect revenge to arrive loudly, with announcements, with ultimatums. But loud things give people time to react. I wasn't interested in reaction. I was interested in realization. A few days after that visit, I went about my routine like nothing had shifted. I watered the plants, folded laundry, made soup I didn't really want. I even answered my son's next call. Just checking in, he said too quickly. Did you have time to think? I did, I replied. His breath caught for half a second. And? I'm still thinking. That silence afterward was different, not casual, calculated. Well, he said carefully, we'll need to move forward soon. Move forward, always forward, never inward. I understand, I said, and I meant it. That afternoon, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in years, not because I'd forgotten, because I'd trusted. The building looked the same. Clean, neutral, unemotional, perfect. The woman behind the desk greeted me politely and asked for my name. When I said it, she paused, checked her screen, then smiled again, this time more professionally. How can I help you today? I sat down. I'd like to review access, I said. She nodded without surprise. Access! That word opens doors quietly. We went through names, permissions, old authorizations I'd signed when my husband was still alive. Back when I believed shared responsibility meant shared respect. Do you want to make changes? She asked. Yes, I said. Not everything. Not dramatically, just one. She looked up. Would you like to notify the other party? I thought about that, about how often I'd been notified after decisions were already made. No, I said, I'll handle that. She typed, printed, asked me to sign. My hand didn't shake. When I left, nothing felt different. That's how I knew it was right. The next morning, my son called. Earlier than usual. Too early. "Hey," he said, voice tight. "Quick question." I waited. "There was an issue yesterday," he continued. "Something didn't go through." I stayed silent. "I probably just misunderstood," he added quickly. "Just wanted to check." Check. Not ask. Check. "What didn't go through?" I asked calmly. Another pause. Something administrative." Administrative. That word people use when they don't want to admit vulnerability. "I'm sure it'll resolve," I said. "Let me know." I hung up before he could respond. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my daughter-in-law. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Did you change something?" Straight to it. I smiled. "Change what?" I asked. "You know what," she said, irritation slipping through despite her effort to contain it. I let the silence stretch. She exhaled sharply. "This is not the time to play games." Games. As if dignity were entertainment. "I'm not playing," I replied. "I'm organizing." She lowered her voice. "You can't just make decisions without talking to us." I almost laughed. Almost. "You've been doing that for years," I said quietly. That stopped her. Not because she disagreed, because she recognized the truth too late. "This affects us," she said. "Yes." That was the point. "We're family," she added, softer now. There it was again. The emergency lever. Family only mattered when convenience was threatened. "I know," I said. "Then why are you doing this?" she asked, frustration cracking through. I chose my words carefully. "Because I'm tired of being assumed." She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, fast, controlled, angry, but cautious. Finally, she said, "We'll talk later." Not, "Can we talk?" "We will." I didn't correct her. That evening, my son came by unannounced. Again. This time, his politeness was thin. "Mom," he said the moment I opened the door, "we need clarity." There it was. Need. Not concern. Not care. Need. I stepped aside. He entered but didn't sit, pacing instead. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said. "We're not asking for anything unreasonable." Unreasonable. As if respect were a luxury. I looked at him, at the way his jaw tightened when he realized I wasn't rushing to reassure him. "At no point," I said calmly, "did you ask whether I was comfortable continuing." He stopped pacing. "We didn't think." "Exactly," I interrupted softly. That silence hurt him more than yelling ever could. "So what are you saying?" he asked. I folded my hands. "I'm saying," I replied, "things will continue differently now." His eyes narrowed. "Different how?" I stood, walked toward the hallway. "Good night," I said. He stared at me. "You're really going to do this?" he said. "Yes." "For how long?" I met his eyes. "As long as it takes." He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just stood there, stunned. Because for the first time in his life, I wasn't available to be managed. When he left, I sat down slowly. My heart was steady, not racing, not fearful. I realized something important then. They weren't angry because I'd taken something away. They were angry because they'd just realized how much they'd been relying on it. And that night, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I understood. This was no longer about money. It was about control. And control, once questioned, never feels safe again. I didn't raise my voice. That's what scared them. The tension didn't explode. It tightened. That's what frightened them. If I had yelled, they would have known how to respond. If I had cried, they would have soothed me just enough to reset things. But I did neither. I went quiet, in a way that didn't ask for repair. 2 days passed without a word from them. On the third morning, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. I didn't rush to answer. When I finally did, my son's voice sounded different. Not confident. Measured. "Mom," he said slowly, "I had to make a few calls." I waited. "There's some confusion," he continued. "People are saying things don't line up the way they used to." People. Not family. Not friends. Professionals. "I'm sure it'll sort itself out," I replied calmly. He swallowed. "It would help if you explained what you changed." There it was. Not anger. Uncertainty. "I explained already," I said. "I reorganized." "That's not an explanation," he snapped. Then caught himself. Silence followed. I could hear his breathing. Fast. Controlled. "You didn't have to do this alone," he said finally. Alone. As if independence were abandonment. "I wasn't alone," I replied. "I just wasn't with you." That ended the call. An hour later, my daughter-in-law texted, "Not polite, not sharp, careful, we need to be aligned." This affects long-term planning. Planning. They loved that word. It made control sound responsible. I didn't respond. Instead, I put on my coat and went for a walk. Not to escape. To remind myself how much of the world existed outside their expectations. At the corner, I ran into a woman I'd known for years. She looked at me and smiled. "You seem lighter," she said. The second time someone had said that. I smiled back. "I feel quieter," I replied. That afternoon, the pressure returned. This time, indirectly. A voicemail from someone I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Hemsworth, this is regarding a clarification request. Please call us back." Clarification. I waited. Another message came in later. Same voice. More formal. More urgent. I knew what it meant. They were calling everyone. Trying to reassert familiarity. Trying to pull authority back into their hands. That evening, my son showed up again. He didn't knock. He rang the bell, then rang it again. When I opened the door, he didn't step inside. He stood there like someone unsure of the rules. "We need to talk," he said. "We already are," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "This is getting complicated." "For you," I said gently. His jaw tightened. "You're doing this on purpose." I didn't deny it. "I'm doing it carefully." "That's not fair," he said. I looked at him. "You never asked for fairness," I replied. "You asked for access." That landed hard. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "You don't understand what position this puts us in. Us. Always us. Never me. I understand perfectly," I said. "That's why I did it." His anger flared just for a moment, then vanished, replaced by calculation. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's reset." Reset. As if this were a technical issue. "We can go back to how things were," he continued. "We'll communicate better." "Better, not differently." I shook my head. "No." He stared at me. "No?" He stared at me. "No?" He repeated. "No," I said again. Because how things were required me to disappear. He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. "You're choosing this over your family," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "I'm choosing myself within my life," I replied. "You just never planned for that." Silence again. He looked past me into the house, as if searching for the version of me that used to soften. She wasn't there. "You're making a mistake," he said. I nodded. "That's what people say," I replied, "when they lose control." He stepped back, not defeated, disoriented. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down 3 things: what I would no longer explain, what I would no longer apologize for, what I would no longer give without being asked. The list was shorter than I expected. The next morning, my phone was silent. No calls, no messages, no pressure. And that's when I knew they were recalculating. Because when people stop demanding answers and start consulting advisors, they've realized something important. They no longer understand the rules, and the person who understands the rules is no longer them. They were used to me filling the silence. I let it grow. The first real crack showed up as politeness. Not kindness. Politeness. That careful, stiff tone people use when they're speaking to someone who suddenly has leverage. "My son didn't call for 2 days. That was intentional." Silence is a tactic before it becomes a confession. On the 3rd day, he called mid-afternoon. Not morning, not evening. A time chosen so it wouldn't sound emotional. "Mom," he said evenly, "I want to talk calmly." Calmly. That word always meant don't push back. "I am calm," I replied. A pause. A pause. Then, "We're running into some delays." Delays. Not problems. Problems admit fault. Delays imply inconvenience. "I've been getting calls," he continued, "from places that usually don't call me." Usually. That word mattered. They had grown used to systems bending around them. Now the systems were asking questions. "Why?" I asked. Another pause. "Because things don't line up the way they used to." There it was. Not accusation. Not anger. Disorientation. "I see," I said. "You didn't warn us," he added. "I didn't need permission," I replied. That changed his tone. Just slightly. "You're putting us in a difficult position." Difficult. Not unfair. Not wrong. Difficult. "As adults," he continued carefully, "we have responsibilities." I smiled. "So do I," I said. Silence again. Then his voice sharpened, just for a second. "You're being stubborn." Stubborn. The word people use when women stop complying. "I'm being precise," I replied. He exhaled slowly. "We've been patient," he said. Patient. That almost made me laugh. Patient while spending my money. Patient while assuming my consent. Patient while discussing my life like an asset. "Patience isn't something you give someone when you need them," I said quietly. "It's something you show when you respect them." That ended the call. But it didn't end the pressure. That evening, my daughter-in-law sent a long message. Too long. Too polished. Every sentence softened. Every concern framed as love. Every accusation disguised as worry. She mentioned the children. School expenses. Stability. Future planning. She didn't mention me. Not once. I read it carefully. Then did something I'd never done before. I didn't respond at all. The next day, The tone changed. Shorter messages. Sharper edges. Are you seriously ignoring us? Do you understand what this affects? This isn't how family behaves. Family. Again. Always when things were slipping. That afternoon, I received a call from someone else. A professional voice. Neutral. Measured. Mrs. Hemsworth, we're just following up on recent changes. Following up. Not correcting. Not questioning. Confirming. Yes, I said calmly. That was intentional. There was a pause. Thank you for clarifying, the voice replied. When I hung up, I sat very still. Because I knew they were being told the same thing. Just not with kindness. That evening, my son showed up again. This time, he didn't ring the bell. He knocked. Firmly. Controlled. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He stood on the porch, jaw tight. This is starting to affect us, he said immediately. No greeting. No softness. Just truth. Finally. I know, I replied. He looked at me, searching my face. You can't just pull support without warning. I tilted my head slightly. I didn't pull support, I said. I removed entitlement. His hands clenched. We were counting on that. That sentence hung between us. Counting on. Not asking. Counting. That's the problem, I said quietly. He swallowed. You're punishing us. No, I replied. I stopped rescuing you. That was when his anger finally surfaced. Not loud. Contained. Dangerous. You're acting like we did something wrong. I met his eyes. You did, he scoffed. We never meant to hurt you. I nodded. Intent doesn't erase impact. He stepped back, then forward again. Do you have any idea what position you're putting us in? Yes, I said. And for the first time, I'm okay with it. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. You're choosing this, he said. Yes. Over your family? I answered without hesitation. I'm choosing dignity within my family. He shook his head. This isn't going to end well. I looked at him calmly. It already has. He didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't apologize. He just stood there breathing hard. Because now he understood something he never expected to learn. I wasn't afraid of being alone, and that terrified him. When he left, he didn't look back. That night, my phone stayed silent. No messages, no calls, no pressure. Because when leverage disappears, so does confidence. I made tea, sat by the window, watched the streetlights turn on one by one. And for the first time since that sentence behind the gate, the one they thought I'd never hear, I felt something settle into place. Not revenge, not bitterness, authority, quiet, unannounced, unshakable. They weren't angry yet. That's how I knew I had time. The silence didn't mean peace. It meant recalculation. When people lose control, they don't always lash out. Sometimes they become careful. That's what happened next. My son didn't call for nearly a week. That alone told me something was wrong. He had never been good at waiting. Then, on a Thursday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mrs. Hemsworth? Yes. This is just a courtesy call. Courtesy. That word carries weight when it comes from someone who doesn't need your approval. We're confirming a few recent changes, the voice continued. Everything appears in order. We just needed verbal confirmation. In order, I said. Yes, they replied. Very clear. 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 That was the word I'd been waiting for. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, not thinking, listening. To the house. To my breath. To the absence of urgency. That afternoon, my daughter-in-law called. Her voice was different now. Softer. Measured. Hi, she said. I hope you're doing well. I waited. We've been meaning to check in, she continued. There's been a bit of confusion lately. Confusion? As if everything hadn't suddenly become very clear. I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page, she said. Same page. Again. Only this time, she wasn't leading. She was asking. What page do you think we're on? I asked. She hesitated. Just long enough. Well, we're family, she said carefully, and families usually talk things through. Usually, when it benefits them. I'm open to conversation, I replied. I'm not open to pressure. Her breathing changed. She tried a different approach. We're just worried, she said. You've always been generous. Generous. Past tense. I smiled to myself. Generosity without respect, I said calmly, turns into expectation. She didn't answer. Instead, she lowered her voice. We didn't think things would go this far. There it was. The admission. Not regret. Surprise. You assumed I wouldn't act, I replied. And you were wrong. Her patience cracked for just a second. You didn't have to make it so formal, she snapped, then stopped herself. Formal. She meant outside us. You took this out of the family, she added quietly. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. I took it out of emotion. That ended the call. That evening, my son texted. Short. Controlled. Controlled. We need to meet. Just talk. No tension. No tension. As if tension hadn't been living quietly on my shoulders for years, I didn't respond. Instead, I went for a walk. The air was cool. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk. I passed people who didn't know my history, who didn't expect anything from me, who didn't see me as a resource, and I felt something close to peace. When I returned home, there was another message. This one, longer, more desperate. We don't understand why you're shutting us out. This affects real things. Please don't make permanent decisions based on hurt feelings. Hurt feelings. They still didn't understand. This wasn't about feelings. It was about position. I finally replied. Just one sentence. These decisions weren't made emotionally. That's why they're permanent. The response came almost immediately. 3 dots. Gone. Then nothing. The next day, my son showed up, unannounced, again. But this time he didn't come inside. He stood on the porch like someone waiting for permission. I just want to talk, he said quietly. I'm listening, I replied, staying where I was. He swallowed. We're struggling, he admitted. Struggling. Not apologizing. Not acknowledging harm. Just stating need. You've always been there, he continued. And now, we don't know where we stand. I looked at him, at the confusion in his eyes, at the fear he was trying to hide. You're standing exactly where you placed yourself, I said. You just never thought you'd have to stand there alone. His jaw tightened. You didn't even tell us you were changing things. I nodded. That's what autonomy looks like. His frustration flared. then dimmed, because anger wouldn't help him now. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. That question surprised him. He wasn't used to not knowing the answer. "I want nothing," I replied. "Nothing." That terrified him more than demands ever could. "You can't just walk away," he said. I met his eyes. "I didn't walk away," I said. I stood still. "You moved." He stood there, silent. No threats, no manipulation, just uncertainty. And that's when I knew. The balance had shifted completely. He left without saying goodbye. That night, I slept deeply, not because everything was resolved, but because it was settled. The next morning, my phone stayed quiet. No messages, no calls, no pressure. Because now they understood something they never had before. I wasn't an option. I wasn't a backup. I wasn't a safety net. I was a boundary, and boundaries don't argue. They hold. I had never spent money without asking permission before. When the silence settled, something unexpected followed. Freedom. Not the dramatic kind people talk about when they're young. The quiet kind you only recognize when no one is counting your decisions anymore. For weeks, I hadn't spent a single dollar on myself. Not out of fear, out of habit. I'd been trained to ask, "Is this necessary? Will someone need this later? Shouldn't I save it?" But one morning, I stood in front of my mirror and realized something that made me laugh softly. Later had already arrived. I put on my coat and drove into town. Not to the grocery store, not to the bank. Somewhere I had avoided for decades, a boutique, the kind with warm lighting and music low enough not to rush you. I stepped inside slowly, half expecting someone to ask who I was shopping for. No one did. A woman about my age greeted me. Not overly friendly, not dismissive, just present. "Take your time," she said. I did. I ran my fingers across fabrics I'd only touched in magazines when I was younger. Silk, cashmere, soft woolen colors I was once told were too bold for me. I remembered being 25, standing in front of a dress I loved, putting it back because diapers were more practical. At 35, I chose school shoes over my own. At 45, it was mortgage payments. At 55, it was helping my children get ahead. At 65, it was being careful. At 72, I picked up the coat. Deep blue, tailored, elegant, not flashy, just unmistakably mine. I tried it on. The mirror didn't show a woman pretending to be young. It showed a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for being alive. "I'll take it," I said. The woman smiled, not surprised. As I paid, my hands didn't shake. I didn't calculate guilt. I didn't imagine explanations. I walked out wearing it. That afternoon, I did something else. I booked a trip, not for family, not for obligation, for myself and women like me. I'd been meeting them quietly for months, at the community center, at the park benches, at the back tables of cafes where conversations go unnoticed. Women whose families had slowly erased them. Women whose usefulness expired before their hearts did. I called them one by one. Dorothy was first. 74. Widowed. Former school librarian. Her son lived 3 miles away and hadn't visited in 6 months. "They say I'm independent," she told me once. "But I think they just don't want to be reminded where time leads," she cried when I invited her. Not loudly. Relieved. Helen came next. 69. Divorced late in life. 3 grandchildren she saw only through photos. "They don't ask me for advice anymore," she said. "Just passwords." She laughed when I told her where we were going. "I haven't been on a vacation that wasn't babysitting," she said. Marjorie was 78, never married, worked 42 years as a seamstress, supported siblings who now spoke to her through attorneys. "They say I'm difficult," she said once, "because I ask questions." She packed before I finished the sentence. Ruth, 68, lost her husband early, moved in with her daughter, temporarily. 5 years later, she still slept in the guest room. "They call it helping," she said, "but I haven't chosen a meal in years." There were 6 of us. 6 women who had been useful long enough to be forgotten. We chose a quiet coastal town. Nothing glamorous, just ocean air, walking paths, morning coffee without urgency. I paid for everything. Not because they couldn't, because I wanted to. This time, generosity didn't feel like surrender. It felt intentional. The first night, we sat by the water wrapped in blankets. No one talked about children, or disappointment, or resentment. Not at first. We talked about dreams we'd shelved, places we never went, clothes we never wore, music we turned down because someone else needed quiet. Dorothy said something that stayed with me. "They don't miss us," she said, staring at the waves. "They miss what we used to do for them." No one argued. Helen ordered wine without checking the price. Marjorie danced badly, proudly, to a song she hadn't heard since 1964. Ruth slept through the night for the first time in years. No one needed her, and she smiled because of it. On the 3rd day, I received a message from my son. Short, uncertain. "Are you traveling?" I looked at the ocean. At 6 women laughing like girls, no one expected to survive this long. I didn't answer. That night, we toasted. Not to revenge, not to loss, to something quieter. Presence. Choice. Money didn't buy happiness, but it bought space. And in that space, we found ourselves again. And that's when I realized this wasn't the end of the story. This was the chapter no one expected us to write. They saw it before I could explain it. They didn't notice at first. That was the strange part. When people expect you to disappear quietly, they don't check for movement. They assume stillness. It was Dorothy's idea to post the photo. Not posed, not polished, just 6 older women sitting on a weathered bench near the ocean. Wind in our hair, blankets over our knees, coffee cups in our hands. Someone had written underneath, "Some of us waited our whole lives for this." I didn't even think about it. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't announce where we were. But silence doesn't protect people from curiosity. My daughter-in-law saw it first. I know because the message came an hour later. "You're on a trip?" Not "How are you?" Not "I hope you're enjoying yourself." Just surprise. I didn't answer. That was becoming a habit. Later that evening, my son called. I let it ring. Then again, then stopped. The next morning, another message arrived. "We didn't know you had plans." Plans. As if my life had always required advance notice. I read it while sitting at breakfast with Helen and Ruth. Helen shook her head when I told her. "They're not upset you're gone," she said calmly. "They're upset you didn't ask." That landed harder than anything else. That afternoon, I received another message. Longer this time. "People are asking questions. You could have told us. It looks strange." Strange. A 72-year-old woman enjoying her life. That's what unsettled them. Back home, I had always been predictable, available, stationary. Now I was visible, and not where they could manage me. On the fourth day, my son finally called again. I answered this time. He didn't start with anger. He started with humor. Forced. "Well," he said, "looks like you're having quite the adventure." Adventure. The word felt borrowed in his mouth. "I am," I replied. There was a pause. Then, "You didn't mention you were going away." "I didn't think I needed permission," I said gently. "That's not what I meant," he replied quickly. I waited. "You're spending quite a bit," he added. There it was. The real concern. Not safety. Not joy. Spending. "I'm spending my money," I said. Silence. He cleared his throat. "We just want to make sure you're being responsible." Responsible. I looked out at the water. At Marjorie laughing at something Dorothy had said. At Ruth walking barefoot near the edge of the shore. "I am," I replied. For the first time in a long time. That irritated him. I could hear it. "You don't need to prove anything," he said. "No one's questioning you." I almost laughed. That was exactly what they were doing. "You sound defensive," he added. "No," I said calmly. "I sound free." That ended the call. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law messaged again. This time, the tone was sharper. "Just be careful. At your age, people can take advantage of you." At your age. As if experience evaporates after 65. I showed the message to Ruth. She smiled bitterly. They say that when they realize they're not the smartest ones in the room anymore. The next morning, Helen suggested we dress up for dinner. Not to impress anyone, just because we could. Marjorie wore red lipstick for the first time in decades. Dorothy put on earrings she'd saved since her 40s. I wore the blue coat. We walked into the restaurant slowly. Not shy, not loud, present. I noticed something then. People moved for us. Not because we demanded it. Because confidence rearranges space. Back home, my son saw another photo. This one of me laughing. Really laughing. The kind that doesn't ask permission. His message came fast this time. "Are you trying to make a point?" I stared at the screen, then typed one sentence. "I'm trying to live." He didn't reply, and I understood something clearly. They weren't angry because I'd cut them off. They were angry because I'd replaced them. Not with people, with purpose. They had expected regret. Instead, they saw joy. And nothing unsettles people more than realizing the person they underestimated is doing just fine without them. Especially when that person is finally spending the life they thought they'd already claimed. They decided to handle me in public. It didn't stop with messages. When shame doesn't work privately, people try it publicly. That's what happened next. I didn't know it at the time. I was standing in a small gift shop near the boardwalk, turning a silver bracelet over in my hands. Thin. Simple. Not flashy. Something I'd wanted when I was younger, but always talked myself out of. Too expensive. Too unnecessary. Too much for someone like me. The woman at the counter smiled. "It looks like it belongs on you," she said. I bought it. Not because of the compliment, because for once I didn't argue with myself. That evening, while we were eating dinner, Dorothy leaned across the table. "Did you see what they're saying online?" she asked quietly. I hadn't. She hesitated. "Your daughter-in-law posted something." I didn't rush to check. That was another new habit. When I finally opened my phone later, I saw it. No names, no tags, just Words. It's heartbreaking when elders forget their place and start acting irresponsibly. Some people confuse independence with recklessness. The comments came fast. Some sympathetic, some cruel, but a few stood out. She should be grateful her family still cares. At her age, money should be saved, not wasted. Sad to see seniors being manipulated into thinking this is empowerment. Manipulated. As if joy must be approved. I felt the old instinct rise. The urge to explain, to clarify, to soften, to reassure strangers that I wasn't broken. I put the phone down. Ruth noticed. "They're trying to put you back in the box," she said. "Yes," I replied. "And they're upset because I don't fit anymore." The next morning, my son called again. I answered. This time, he didn't pretend to be calm. "People are talking," he said. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did something happen?" Talking. "I know," I replied. "You're embarrassing us," he said sharply. Us. That word carried weight. "I didn't realize my happiness needed your approval," I said. "That's not fair," he snapped. "You know what people assume." "Yes," I said quietly. "They assume I should disappear politely." He exhaled loudly. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" he asked. I waited. "To my colleagues," he continued. "To her family? To everyone who knows us." That's when I finally understood. This wasn't about me. This was about optics. "I'm not managing your image anymore," I said. There was silence. Then anger. "You're being selfish," he said. I smiled. Not visibly. Internally. Because that word always comes out when obedience stops. "I spent decades being selfless," I replied. "This isn't selfish. It's overdue." He tried another tactic. Concern. "Mom, what if something happens to you out there?" I looked around the room. At women who checked on each other. At laughter. At shared meals. "At least here," I said. "I'm not invisible." That ended the call. Later that day, Helen told me something quietly. "They asked around," she said. "About your finances." That made me laugh. A short, humorless sound. "They're nervous," Ruth added. "They thought you'd slow down, not speed up." That night, I wore the bracelet to dinner. No one commented. But I noticed the way it caught the light, the way it reminded me that small choices add up. The next morning, a package arrived. From my daughter-in-law. Inside was a cardigan. Plain. Beige. A note attached. "Thought you might prefer something more appropriate." Appropriate. I held it for a moment, then folded it neatly and placed it back in the box. I didn't return it. I donated it. That afternoon, we sat on the beach again. Marjorie talked about her first marriage, about how she gave up painting because her husband said it was childish. Dorothy spoke about the years she worked without spending $1 on herself. Helen admitted she hadn't bought new shoes in 10 years. We laughed. Not bitterly, knowingly. That evening, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no messages, just quiet. And for the first time, I realized something surprising. Their anger wasn't frightening, their silence wasn't painful. What hurt before was the waiting. Now, I wasn't waiting. They could be confused. They could be angry. They could be embarrassed, but they couldn't stop me. Because the greatest revenge was never the money. It was the moment they realized I didn't need them anymore to feel whole. And I was done apologizing for that. I bought the first thing they spent 30 years teaching me I wasn't allowed to want. There was a store I'd walked past for years. Not avoided, not ignored, just past. The kind with wide glass windows and soft lighting, where everything looked like it belonged to someone else's life. I stopped in front of it one morning without realizing I had. Inside, a piano sat near the window. Not a grand one. A small, upright, warm wood, keys slightly yellowed with age. I used to play. Not well, but honestly. Before children, before schedules, before life became about practicality instead of pleasure. My husband used to listen from the doorway. He never commented. He just stayed. I hadn't touched a piano in over 30 years. Helen noticed where I was standing. "You want to go in?" she asked. "I don't play anymore," I replied automatically. She smiled. That wasn't the question. Inside, the owner looked up from behind the counter. "Take your time," he said gently. I sat. The bench creaked softly beneath me. My fingers hesitated above the keys like they were waiting for permission. Then I pressed one. The sound surprised me. Not sharp, not wrong, just alive. I played slowly. Nothing impressive. Something familiar. When I stopped, I realized no one had spoken. Dorothy had tears in her eyes. "You didn't lose it," she whispered. "I hadn't. I just buried it under obligation. I bought the piano. Not to prove anything. Not to impress anyone. Because it felt like returning something to its rightful owner." That afternoon, we sat in the cafe across the street. Helen stirred her tea thoughtfully. "I always wanted a leather jacket," she said suddenly. We laughed. "I'm serious," she continued, "but I was told it wasn't sensible." Marjorie nodded. "I wanted to go to Italy," she said. "My husband said it was unnecessary." Ruth smiled sadly. "I wanted silence," she said, "and spent 50 years apologizing for asking for it." That's when we decided, not dramatically, quietly. We weren't done wanting. Helen bought the jacket the next day, wore it immediately, stood straighter in it. Marjorie booked the trip. Not Italy, Portugal, closer, still hers. Ruth rented a cabin for 2 weeks. No visitors, no obligations, just mornings that belonged to her. As for me, I booked something I'd dreamed of since my 20s. A slow train journey. Across places I'd only seen in magazines. Windows wide. No deadlines. No expectations. When my son found out, he didn't call. He emailed. Short, tight. "You're really spending like this?" I read it on the balcony while the others were inside playing cards. "Yes," I typed back. "I'm spending on myself." He didn't reply. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law posted again. Another vague message. Some people confuse late-life rebellion with freedom. I showed it to Helen. She snorted. They confuse obedience with love. That night, we sat together and told our stories properly. Not summaries, not highlights, the long versions. Helen talked about the job she gave up when she married, the promotion she declined, because it would have made her husband uncomfortable. Marjorie spoke about her paintings, how she stopped when her mother said art was selfish. Ruth admitted she stayed in a quiet, loveless marriage because everyone praised her patience. And me? I talked about the years I spent shrinking, about dinners where my voice wasn't invited, about laughter that happened around me, not with me. No one interrupted. No one minimized. No one explained it away. That alone felt like luxury. The next morning, I woke early. Not from anxiety, from excitement. I wrote a list, not a bucket list, just a living one, things I still wanted to do. Places, sounds, moments. The list was longer than I expected. Later that day, my son sent another message. This one colder. Just remember, we're still your family. I looked at it for a long time, then wrote back. I didn't forget, I just remembered myself. That evening, I played the piano again. Not for anyone. Just because I could. The sound filled the room slowly, not demanding attention, just existing. And I understood something quietly profound. They thought money was what they were losing. What they were actually losing was control over a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for wanting more. And I wasn't done yet. I would have hated this 10 years ago, she said. Now, it feels like proof I'm still here. That afternoon, Marjorie unpacked a small canvas. She didn't announce it. She just sat by the window and started painting. No one commented. We'd learned better than that. By evening, the painting had shape, water, sky, movement. She stared at it for a long time. I used to apologize for wanting this, she said quietly. No one responded, because there was nothing left to explain. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. You're really away that long? No greeting, no concern, just accounting. Yes, I replied. Minutes passed. Then, you didn't tell us you'd be gone. I didn't think I needed to, I wrote. That was the end of that conversation. The next day, we went into town. Not shopping, wandering. Dorothy tried on a scarf she didn't need. Bought it anyway. Helen bought shoes that weren't practical. Ruth bought a book she already owned. I want 2 copies, she said. One for reading, one for lending without worrying if it comes back. At lunch, we talked about the first times we realized we were no longer being seen. Not the big moments, the small ones. Helen remembered when her son talked over her during a doctor's appointment. Marjorie recalled a family dinner where her chair had been moved so she wouldn't block the view. Ruth described the moment someone said, "You're lucky you don't have responsibilities," as if solitude were a consolation prize. I told them about the laugh behind the gate. No one gasped. No one asked questions. They understood immediately. That evening, a photo appeared online. Not from us, from someone else in the restaurant. 6 older women laughing around a table, wine glasses raised. Nothing extravagant, but visible. The caption read, "Goals." That's when the messages started. Not directly to me, to Helen's son, to Marjorie's daughter, to Dorothy's niece. Is that your mom? She looks different. Did you know she was traveling? Helen's son called her that night. What's going on? He asked. She put him on speaker. I'm on vacation, she said. With who? He pressed. With myself, she replied. There was a pause. Then irritation. You should have told me, she smiled. I didn't ask you to come. He didn't like that. Dorothy's daughter texted. This looks irresponsible. People are talking. Dorothy typed back one sentence. I finally am. The anger couldn't come out fully. Not yet. They still needed us. Still relied on us. Still counted on the quiet safety net we'd always been. So instead, the anger twisted into confusion, into embarrassment, into questions they didn't know how to ask without revealing too much. On the 4th night, We sat outside under blankets. The ocean was loud, comfortingly so. Marjorie handed me the finished painting. "I want you to have it," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because you reminded me that I'm allowed to want things again." I held it carefully. That painting wasn't about water. It was about movement. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsing conversations, just rest. The next morning, my son called again. This time, his voice was controlled, measured. "Mom, we need to talk when you get back." "When I get back?" I repeated. "Yes. There are things we need to sort out." "Sort out." I smiled. "We'll see," I said. After I hung up, Ruth looked at me. "They don't like that they can't rush you anymore," she said. "No," I replied. "They don't like that they're not part of the decision." That afternoon, we planned another trip. Not this year. Next. Somewhere further, somewhere slower. Because once you stop waiting for permission, you realize how much life is still available. And back home, without admitting it out loud, our families were beginning to understand something unsettling. We weren't on pause. We weren't confused. We weren't lost. We were choosing. And that terrified them. They didn't get angry when they saw me happy. They got angry when they realized I was happy without them. The trip wasn't loud. That's important. It wasn't flashy or fast or dramatic. It was slow by design. A rented house near the coast, far enough from the tourist noise, close enough to hear the water at night. White walls, wide windows, a long wooden table that didn't care who sat at the head. There were 6 of us. Not friends the way people imagine, more like survivors who finally stopped pretending nothing had happened. Helen was 74, former school administrator, 2 sons who lived nearby and called only when something needed signing. She had spent 30 years organizing other people's lives. No one had ever asked how she wanted to spend her own. Marjorie was 70, widowed early. One daughter who spoke to her like she was permanently confused. Marjorie used to paint landscapes in her 30s. She hadn't picked up a brush in decades. Ruth was 76, never married, worked as a librarian until retirement. Her family praised her independence publicly while quietly resenting that she didn't need them. Dorothy was 71. 4 children. None of them lived more than an hour away. None of them visited unless it was convenient. She'd raised them alone after her husband left. Now they called her dramatic when she asked for time. And me. 72. 3 children. A widow for 9 years. The one who finally stopped shrinking. The first morning we woke up there, no one rushed, no schedules, no obligation to be useful. Helen made coffee too strong. Ruth opened all the windows. Marjorie sat on the floor with her back against the wall and said, "I forgot, rooms could feel this quiet." We ate breakfast slowly, not talking much, just being. Later, we walked along the shore, shoes in our hands, feet in cold water. Helen laughed when a wave soaked her pants. "I would have hated this 10 years ago," she said. "Now, it feels like proof I'm still here." That afternoon, Marjorie unpacked a small canvas. She didn't announce it. She just sat by the window and started painting. No one commented. We'd learned better than that. By evening, the painting had shape, water, sky, movement. She stared at it for a long time. "I used to apologize for wanting this," she said quietly. No one responded, because there was nothing left to explain. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. "You're really away that long?" No greeting, no concern, just accounting. Yes, I replied. Minutes passed. Then, you didn't tell us you'd be gone. I didn't think I needed to, I wrote. That was the end of that conversation. The next day, we went into town. Not shopping, wandering. Dorothy tried on a scarf she didn't need. Bought it anyway. Helen bought shoes that weren't practical. Ruth bought a book she already owned. I want 2 copies, she said. One for reading, one for lending without worrying if it comes back. At lunch, we talked about the first times we realized we were no longer being seen. Not the big moments, the small ones. Helen remembered when her son talked over her during a doctor's appointment. Marjorie recalled a family dinner where her chair had been moved so she wouldn't block the view. Ruth described the moment someone said, "You're lucky you don't have responsibilities," as if solitude were a consolation prize. I told them about the laugh behind the gate. No one gasped. No one asked questions. They understood immediately. That evening, a photo appeared online. Not from us, from someone else in the restaurant. 6 older women laughing around a table, wine glasses raised. Nothing extravagant, but visible. The caption read, "Goals." That's when the messages started. Not directly to me, to Helen's son, to Marjorie's daughter, to Dorothy's niece. "Is that your mom? She looks different. Did you know she was traveling?" Helen's son called her that night. "What's going on?" he asked. She put him on speaker. "I'm on vacation," she said. "With who?" he pressed. "With myself," she replied. There was a pause. Then irritation. "You should have told me," she smiled. "I didn't ask you to come." "He didn't like that." Dorothy's daughter texted, "This looks irresponsible. People are talking." Dorothy typed back one sentence, "I finally am." The anger couldn't come out fully. Not yet. They still needed us. Still relied on us. Still counted on the quiet safety net we'd always been. So instead, the anger twisted into confusion, into embarrassment, into questions they didn't know how to ask without revealing too much. On the 4th night, we sat outside under blankets. The ocean was loud, comfortingly so. Marjorie handed me the finished painting. "I want you to have it," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because you reminded me that I'm allowed to want things again." I held it carefully. That painting wasn't about water. It was about movement. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsing conversations, just rest. The next morning, my son called again. This time, his voice was controlled, measured. "Mom, we need to talk when you get back." "When I get back?" I repeated. "Yes. There are things we need to sort out." "Sort out." I smiled. "We'll see," I said. After I hung up, Ruth looked at me. "They don't like that they can't rush you anymore," she said. "No," I replied. "They don't like that they're not part of the decision." That afternoon, we planned another trip. Not this year. Next. Somewhere further, somewhere slower. Because once you stop waiting for permission, you realize how much life is still available. And back home, without admitting it out loud, our families were beginning to understand something unsettling. We weren't on pause. We weren't confused. We weren't lost. We were choosing. And that terrified them. Coming home wasn't the end of my freedom. It was the moment I decided what I would never tolerate again. I came home alone. Not abandoned. Not dismissed. Alone by choice. The house was quiet when I opened the door. Not empty. quiet in the way a place becomes when it's no longer waiting for approval. I set my bag down slowly, took off my shoes, and stood there for a moment. No one asking where I'd been. No one wondering how long I'd stay. No one deciding whether my presence was convenient. That laugh came back to me then. The one behind the gate. The one that split something open. Not because it was cruel, because it was careless. It told me everything I'd refused to hear for years. I had become background noise. A resource. A role. Not a woman. And somehow, that realization felt lighter than pretending otherwise. I made tea, sat at the table, watched steam rise. And for the first time since Arthur died, I didn't feel like I was waiting for my life to resume. It already had. The next morning, I went to the doctor, not because anyone told me to, because I wanted to. I updated my glasses, prescription, started physical therapy for my knees, asked questions without apologizing for taking time. That afternoon, I bought fresh flowers. Not for guests. For myself, I rearranged the living room so the chair faced the window instead of the television. I started walking every morning. Slowly. Deliberately. I cooked meals I enjoyed instead of meals that traveled well. I slept better. I laughed more. I stopped explaining myself. 2 weeks later, I invited my son over, not out of obligation, not to negotiate, to speak. He arrived tense, prepared, like someone expecting terms and conditions. I didn't offer coffee right away. We sat. I want to tell you something, I said. He nodded cautiously. I heard a sentence once, I continued. That made everything clear. He shifted. I told him about the laugh. The exact words. The moment behind the gate. He didn't interrupt. Didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. That told me enough. That laugh, I said calmly, didn't break me. It woke me. He tried to explain. Stress. Misunderstanding. Jokes taken wrong. I raised my hand gently. I'm not here for explanations, I said. I'm here to tell you what changed. He looked at me then. Really looked. I realized, I said, that I had been measuring my worth by how useful I was to you. Silence. And when that usefulness faded, I continued, so did your attention. He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't hate you, I said, but I won't live like that anymore. He asked quietly. So, what now? Now. The question people ask when control slips. Now, I said. I live my life for myself. I told him about the trips, the piano, the women, the mornings that belonged only to me. I'm taking care of myself, I said, because I deserve it. I looked him in the eye, and I won't apologize for that. He nodded, not relieved, not grateful, just aware. I spoke to my daughter-in-law later, briefly, clearly. I'm not angry, I told her. I'm done minimizing myself to keep others comfortable. She didn't respond, and that was fine, because I wasn't asking for permission. Now, my days are simple and full. I wake up when my body is ready. I eat what I enjoy. I spend my money on experiences, comfort, beauty, and peace. I sit in the sun. I read. I listen. I choose. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet to keep harmony, the one who believed love meant endurance. I wish I could tell her this. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. That laugh, it didn't end me. It introduced me to myself. And now, I live without shrinking, without waiting, without asking if I'm allowed. Because I am. And I always was. Thank you for listening to my story. If you heard something familiar in it, know this: it's never too late to choose yourself, not loudly, not angrily, but completely,